Compañeros, welcome to another edition of the SQL Data Partners Podcast. I am Carlos El Chacon, your host, and I am joined today by Mr. Kevin Fiesel.
Hello.
And Mr. Yes, I Can Pick Up Conference Crud 2, Eugene Meininger.
Yeah, that's my middle name. It's Eugene. Yes, I Can Pick Up Conference Crud 2, Meininger.
Yes, good to have you.
Happy to be here. Happy to be alive.
Although, look, his father was Mr. Yes, I Can Pick Up Conference Crud 2, Meidinger. He's just, I Can Pick Up Conference Crud 2.
Yeah.
Goes by his middle name, of course. So I guess that would make you a junior.
Yeah.
So today we are talking a little bit about this and that, right? There are a couple of things, and so we're just going to kind of go with it. Maybe taking some inspiration from SQL Server Radio, right? Because you never know quite what you're going to get with those guys. So this is going to be a little bit of that, and then we'll see where it goes. Let's see. Show notes for today's episode are going to be at SQLDataPartners.com/263. And okay, so now we haven't done. So I still have SQL Server in the news as a placeholder on my notes, but we have not talked about this in a while. And I don't know that this is news, but it was news to me. How about that? Right? One of these things that I did not realize that you could do. And it is a learn.microsoft article. And that is, in the event that all your administrators get locked out or get moved, there is a way to start SQL Server in single user mode and add yourself back through SQL CMD.
Yep, have we had that? I thought we already had like the in case of break glass kind of thing. Is this something more specific or what?
No, I just right. So I have been living under a rock all of these years. I guess in my very safe sanctuary where administrators were not dropped from machines.
No, Carlos. You need to inherit more servers where no one knows the SA password. Is what it is.
Apparently, I was like, are you kidding me?
I want to say off the top of my head, all right, quiz bonus points. I want to say off the top of my head, you need to include -M to start it up in single user mode.
Right, that's the single user mode, right? Or you can't do the /F.
Still got it. Still DBA, boys.
There you go. Yeah, and then you go in and just SQL CMD it, and
who's dropping all the admins? Is what I want to ask.
What's that?
Carlos.
Oh, yeah. I said, who's dropping all the admins?
Yeah. No. So in this specific instance, this is a new Azure spin-up web edition SQL Server that they just didn't bother adding any admins.
Oh.
Huh.
How can you do that? Like doesn't
so because so it used to be that the local administrators were automatically added.
Oh, okay.
So they took that out, right? And so now it is possible to install SQL Server and nobody has access.
Okay.
But it never occurred to me that you would actually install that and at least not add yourself, right? Like
I'm pretty sure I've had to do this at least once in my career with like a lost SA account or something like that. Because what happens? Oh, I can tell you what probably happened. At my last job, we had a time clock application, right? So you would clock in and out with your little card and all that kind of stuff. And we would pull information from it to do reporting. And I'm pretty sure it was SQL Server Express. And I don't think anyone remembered the SA account. And so like people had just enough access to do what they needed to do. But I think there was some point where we're like, all right, we gotta break in to our own server.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah. There you go. So it was news to me. So at least I had forgotten about it. Right.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that you just push.
This is why I work in BI now, just to be clear.
Let other people do this stuff. Yeah. There is also news in the sense of we finally have cumulative updates again.
Okay.
There was a stretch of a few months where SQL Server 2019 had come out and there were no CUs. And there were also no CUs for, or excuse me, 2022 had come out. There were no CUs for 2019 or 17 or even 16 for that stretch of a few months. And now there was a big GDR that released, I think, when was that, January? So obviously not that new, but it's still relatively news.
There you go.
News from the front. And once that big security fix came out, then we started seeing CUs. And now we've seen CU1 and CU2 come out in fairly quick progression. So if you're running that unpatched SQL Server 2022 RTM, there actually are some updates now.
Yeah, there you go. One of the chosen few. Well, I shouldn't say that, but I'm still not seeing as many as I'm sure Microsoft would like to see. Anyway, okay, so here we go. We have a couple of shout outs we wanted to get to, and we've got our very first one, Thomas Cronewitter. So now Thomas, he reached out on the website, so you can be like Thomas. Now I have to find where. Now let's see. Here we go. On the website. So hey guys, I'm a longtime listener. I had to look it up. 2016. So this is one of the first, right? First way back machine. Says, man, Time flies. I just wanted to say you how great your podcast is. Thank you. It even hasn't gotten any worse now that Kevin and Eugene are there.
I mean,
I may have
true, but harsh but true.
Yeah. It's the Boy Scouts motto, right? Like, don't leave it any worse. Or is that the Girl Scouts one? I don't know. It's some Scouts motto, like, don't leave things any worse than they were. That's my approach.
Oh, the outdoor code is leave no trace.
There we go. Yeah, take only photographs, leave only footprints. That's
right. So that's Eugene on the lawful good side. I'm just chaotic neutral here.
Yeah.
So on net, we got nothing useful.
As longtime listeners know, have come to expect here on the SQL Data Partners Podcast. Okay, so thank you, Thomas, right, for reaching out. But if you've been a longtime listener, right, come say hello, right? The water's fine. We are not going to bite. Hopefully by now you've known that you can come and say hello. So we do appreciate that. Or you know what? Even head over to SQLDataPartners.com/t-shirt or t-shirts, whichever one, because maybe you want to buy more than one t-shirt, right? Lay down your $20 and buy yourself a t-shirt, a black t-shirt just in time for summer, right? Because you want to be nice and warm. Okay.
Carlos, you may need to fire your marketing person. By the way, you can do t-shirt with a hyphen or without. So there's no reason not to go to SQLDataPartners.com/t-shirt, regardless of your philosophy on whether a t-shirt has a hyphen in it or not.
Yes, that's right. Equal opportunity, wearers, right? Okay. Beniam Wadajo, Guna Sekar, Valerie Anders, Marius.
I got to cut off Carlos right here because otherwise she would get very angry with me. Valerie was actually a former program manager that worked with me. So special shout out to Valerie for everything she does.
Yes, indeed. Right. We love our Channel Advisor alums. And right.
More diaspora at this point, right, Kevin?
Yes, actually, yeah, we're both gone from it. So
yeah. Well, I said alums, right?
Her before me.
I want to paint the picture of them drifting aimlessly at sea at the moment because there's been a lot of layoffs, unfortunately.
Indeed. Okay, Marius Scavli, Jen L, Charlene Lee Harper, Dave Sharon, Michael Coleman, Ricardo Calejo, Minionware, Sarbi Pakarna, Peter Larson, Derek Slynn, Andrew Bush, Jennifer Smith, Alan Cransfield, Samaria Yami, Anas Karat, and Sean McCown. So, as always, thanks for giving us a little love in social media or reaching out on the website to say hello. We do appreciate it. And we look forward to hearing from you. Okay, so in coming up or in talking a little bit about what we actually dug into the listener questionnaire box, or some of these may have actually come from our YouTube comments. I can't remember exactly where these originated, but we had a couple of questions, and Kevin felt comfortable about answering these ones, and so we felt like we could take these on.
Yeah, all the other ones, you're on your own.
Yeah, way too complex. Okay, so let's see. You want to take us through the first one, Kevin?
Sure. And then we're going to quiz Carlos and Eugene.
Oh, here we go.
For this one, I'll be the backstop just in case they don't have good enough answers.
Oh.
All right. Quoth the reader. I am a new SQL learner, having a general inquiry. How would a company manage to write documentation of its own SQL applications? I would be so grateful for any kind of help. Unquote, because, I don't know that I would ever express gratefulness, especially not in public. It doesn't seem like the type of thing I would do. So, how do we write documentation of our SQL applications? Is there an easy way other than hire lots of interns? Because that's a viable answer.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. If Kevin was a part of the answering, what he would say is you do literate programming and write all the comments in LaTeX, and then the code is actually in comments so that you can just read the code, and then it technically can either output to a PDF or an application.
I mean, I'm all in on this, although I would pronounce it LaTeX rather than latex. But
fair. Yeah,
it's
fair.
okay. I've heard it both ways.
Yeah, I blame the Greeks or the yeah. How? So I'll give you a more sincere answer. So the question was about a SQL application. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So if you're documenting a SQL application, so for example, you might look at metadata tables. You might look at sys.tables, sys.columns. You may look at information schema.columns. Right. There's actually a little bit of difference in what's available between information schema, which is available for any ANSI SQL compliant language, versus SQL Server specific metadata tables like sys.tables, sys.columns.
Yeah.
So
my preference is for anything that we can do as close to the source system as possible. So stored procedures, that's lots of comments on the stored procedures. Mm-hmm. I'm going to get this wrong, but my recollection is that for columns, there was never a great way to do comments. There was like some extended properties thing that nobody ever knew about. Yeah. And it's like.
And tables. Yeah. It's kind of a pain. Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like you end up in Word with like data dictionaries or Excel and data dictionaries and doing that kind of stuff and lots of ERD diagrams, which is fine if you have an easy way to update them. Yeah. But I mean, how many people are using Visio? I don't know.
Right. Well, yeah, Visio for a while took out the ability to reverse engineer database diagrams.
Oh, that's right.
And then they eventually added it back in because people complained. But I do agree. So those extended properties, that was something that, if I remember right, it was in SQL Server 2005. Going back quite a ways, you never really saw a lot of companies or people use them. A couple of tools made good use of them. Actually, Redgate, if I remember right, SQL Prompt uses them. Oh. There are at least a couple of tools which do leave annotations on the properties of those columns or tables. But there was never a nice, easy way to view that. So you could write stored procedure calls that would retrieve that information for a column, but there was no way to visualize that information in a readily accessible manner. So the only people who would ever make use of them were the data people who lived in that database and constantly used those tables, right, would even realize that they exist. And of the companies I worked for, none of them have ever made regular use of those extended properties. I did it for a little while and then stopped because, who am I writing this for? Myself.
Right, sure.
Yeah, I feel like in MySQL it's a lot easier to do comments, but with the columns. But it's been maybe a decade, so I don't know. Yeah. But yeah, it didn't ever seem like it's one of those things like there has to be a better way, and then the infomercial starts, right? What are your thoughts, Carlos?
So the word documentation is kind of, all over the place because admittedly, when I, first glanced, I'm thinking, inline comments, right, are kind of the way to go there. There's the templates you can get where you puts the comments up on your stored procedures. But yeah, just in terms of, but even just figuring out, who does what. Unfortunately, a lot of times you are kind of looking outside the system. I was a big fan at the time of like the Embarcadero tool, which again was kind of like Visio on steroids, had a lot more more information. But then again, now it was great, and then it got purchased by CA, right? And then they, jacked up the price and didn't really make it any better, and so that became, cumbersome. And then, again, and every user has to have one, to open it, and so it just becomes, expensive that way.
Yeah. So when it comes to those entity relational modeling tools, I've never been a huge fan of them. I like the concept, but like you just mentioned, it's so difficult to keep this up to date. You kind of, at a big company where you have a person whose job is literally to manage the data model, that type of tool makes a whole lot of sense. They're living in that tool, and they're coming up. Like I've worked at one company where here's our data model of several thousand tables that they would print out on a plotter. And here are the top 300 tables, the most important ones that everybody needs to know about. They print this thing out on a plotter, and mostly because they had a plotter printer. It was a big company, and so you could have that model up to, okay, I've made these changes to this model. We're now in version 4.6.7.146.12.
Right.
Well, that's good, but when you're a solo shop, or you're the database person, or there's a team of 3 database people, you can't really dedicate one person to just creating a model. And if you are constantly developing, keeping that model up to date is tough. You can reverse engineer, but the problem I've seen with those tools is the first time import, you reverse engineer it, you're like, I don't like the way this layout looks, and you spend a lot of time dragging and getting things exactly the way you want it. And then, okay, I'm going to reverse engineer it again. And it brings you back to that default. Everything is ugly. All the lines cross. All the tables are a mess.
Yeah. No, you definitely can't do all of it. Once you've imported, then you get a table, right? Or, whatever. You're going to the individual object level, right? To do that.
Right. Right. So at that level, I'm not a huge fan of what's available, unless you're talking about, I just need this one time. I'm a consultant who's coming in to get an idea of what your system is like and tell you what your system is like, because you don't know what your system is like.
Sure.
Which a little more common than you'd think.
Right.
But there's next level I would talk about is, I want to perform reconnaissance on this server. I'm new to this server. How do I get up to speed as quickly as possible? And this is where I think actually SQL Server Management Studio's built-in reports on a database make a lot of sense. So you can look for, what are the largest tables? What are the most populated tables? I could also write some queries to say, all right, well, what are my foreign key constraints? I know I'm living in a wild, idealistic world where people actually put foreign key constraints on. But if I have those key constraints, at least I can say, okay, how do these things join together? What do matching column names look like? Can I find some information? Can I look in sys.sql modules for those procedures and see where these various objects are being used? So that's where you get back to driving from metadata and learning a bit about what is that structure of the database. You don't have a full idea of utilization. You don't have a full idea of what the broader data model looks like, but at least you get an idea of, what are the big hitters? What are the big players? Oftentimes you'll see there's about 10 to 15 tables that are really, really important in a database. And then you may have dozens or hundreds of tables that are lookup data, that are ancillary, that are obsolete, that are unnecessary, or that are just occasionally there. They exist because they're needed once in a while.
Right. For that feature that never quite made it big, but it's still in there, and you got to support whatever. Yeah. Yeah. So it is interesting. Now, this example I actually found, admittedly through an execution plan, but you bring up those reports and kind of taking a peek there. Just showing that to other people, like, we said, hey, we're pulling a lot of records from this table. And they're like, oh, there shouldn't be that many records in that table, right? We need a cleanup process because we only need to keep 30 days or, whatever, right?
Right.
And so, that can be helpful, right? For, helping you know it's in your system. Yeah.
Yep. So hopefully that helps our intrepid reader from 2019. I'm assuming that's when this comment was.
Excuse me. were just so busy, right? With sometimes the questions, they take a while to make it into the episode.
Well, I mean, it's only what, March of 2020?
That's right. Right. At the speed of newspapers, right? Okay. Here's another one, right? And thank goodness here. So could I install on my PC only SQL Server Management Studio without a SQL Server?
Yes, actually, that's kind of the opposite. The question is available now.
Right.
So used to be back in the day. Let's take a walk down memory lane, folks. Back in the day,
when I was your age.
Yeah. About let's go back to a decade ago. You install that fresh new copy of SQL Server 2012 on your server, and if you wanted Management Studio, you had the SQL Server installation media, and then you would select in Tools, Install SQL Server Management Studio, and that's how you would get SQL Server Management Studio. It was kind of tied to the version of SQL Server, and that was it. Well, as of roughly, if I remember right, it was about 2016, 2017, that time frame.
Sounds right.
The Microsoft SQL Server Tools team broke SQL Server Management Studio off from regular installations of SQL Server. So now it updates on its own cadence, which means we get new features without having to wait 3 years for a new edition of SQL Server to come out. It also means that the download site is separate from where you get your installation media for a SQL Server. Nowadays, if you go to Tools and you say Install SQL Server Management Studio, that's a hyperlink to where you can download SQL Server Management Studio, and you don't need SQL Server installation media for that.
Yeah.
So you can absolutely have SQL Server Management Studio on a PC without SQL Server installed.
Yeah, what a pain that used to be, right? You finally get the server installed, and then you know all your clients or the developers, right? They're spinning up new PCs, and then you got to go find the media, and
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Now, did they break that off just because of the cadence of Azure SQL and all that kind of stuff, or was there some other reason? Because I don't remember ever actually hearing why they decided to finally break it apart.
I don't know that there was ever anything that they publicly said. Wild speculation would say, look, this is a client tool. Client tools update more frequently. They update at a regular cadence versus server products that you're expecting. I'll have my cumulative updates, but that I'm not expecting a new version of SQL Server for a few more years.
Well, right. Which makes sense. And I mean, and that was, shortly before that was the time when they were still sending like MSDN DVDs to all like Microsoft MVPs and stuff. And now like I just bought a car and it doesn't have a CD drive. So it makes sense that like as bandwidth, as broadband got good and all that kind of stuff.
I mean,
people can just download what they need.
My last car had a floppy disk, so it was fine.
Yeah. Well, that's for compatibility with the like your modern stuff, right?
That's right. Actually, my wife's last car had a cassette player. I had a little MP3 cassette player.
Yes.
It would last for roughly 12 hours before it would just tear itself apart. But for those 12 hours, you got all the MP3s that could fit on an iPod Mini or a Nano or whatever.
Or a Shuffle if you're starting out back in the day.
I had a Shuffle. That's right. It was a Shuffle. That's the one that it was. Yeah.
Because like who needs a user interface? We don't. Just give me 5 buttons. Done.
That's right. Just play the podcasts in the order that I tell you to. Do your job.
Yeah. It's a tangent, but our show is entirely tangent, especially like you said, the potpourri episode. But I was so mad when they updated the podcast app on. I have 2 of these because I need sound to filter out stuff. So I listen to podcasts all the time, and it used to be that you just hit play and it would play them in chronological order. But Apple decided they need to sell access to podcasts. So now it's all show based. So if you start one from a specific show, it'll play through all of the episodes that you haven't heard yet of that show before it goes to anything else. And so if I just want random background noise, it does not work nearly so well. But what are you going to do?
Complain?
Yeah. Timco's not taking my phone calls. I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah. Survey says
you're just not trying hard enough, Eugene.
It could be true. That could be
You've got 2 phones. You can make twice as many calls.
That's true.
Okay, our next subject is the SOS scheduler yield.
Right. We should have just slapped a question mark at the end of there, so it could still be a question like SOS scheduler yield.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm Ron Burgundy. Yeah.
So the question, I suppose we could make the question, what is SOS scheduler yield? Why would I care about it? And what are some nuances about it that make people that make the knee-jerk reaction of I see SOS scheduler yield, therefore you need more CPUs, not necessarily correct, but also not necessarily incorrect.
Right.
How's that for a lead?
Yeah, there you go. So very common wait type that that you'll see, and the ultimately the definition, and perhaps maybe the old definitions, a lot of the things that are on the webs, right, talk about being CPU kind of bound wait, right? That the CPU is giving up something to do something else because it's waiting.
Yeah. So I'm going to read directly from Paul Randall's wait stats site, that's the SQL Skills wait stats site, because frankly, why would I go from memory for this one?
There we go.
So what happens is you have a thread that is executing. SQL servers, parallel processing system. We have threads that kick off that execute, and you get 4 milliseconds to do all the damage you can for your query. So your thread gets in there and it's just pounding away for 4 milliseconds. Then, all right, 4 milliseconds is up. One of a couple of things has happened. First, your query is knocking out roadblocks that says, oh, you know what? I need to access some disk. So then it pulls itself off the scheduler because, hey, I'm waiting for disk. Great. We now have a disk-related wait. Or, oh, I'm waiting for a lock. I need to be able to take a lock on this resource before I can write to it. Well, all right, we're going to wait on a lock. Or I'm waiting for resource semaphore. I'm waiting for relevant resources, like enough memory to perform, granted to perform this operation. So these are waits of I'm not getting my job done because something is blocking me. And then usually as part of the regular process, things become available, and then you get picked back up on the schedule and you pound away for up to 4 milliseconds. Well, what happens after 4 milliseconds is that it's like the Looney Tunes cartoon where the horn goes off and everybody just stops working because SQL Server is a union shop. So you hit 4 milliseconds, it's like, oh, my job's done. And you pull yourself off. Now, it is voluntarily yielded the scheduler. So, all right, my 4 milliseconds is up. I'm going to move back to the bottom of the queue. And in that way, it's kind of like you're riding a very popular ride at Cedar Point. And you're like, I love that ride so much, I'm just getting back in line for it. And you just keep getting back in line for the roller coaster until you've had enough of it, until you vomited out all of your breakfast, at which point, then it's time to move on to another ride. So scheduler, so a task has voluntarily yielded the scheduler for other tasks to do their work, and it's waiting for a quantum to be renewed. That's a fairly benign sounding wait. Like, hey, you're doing work.
Sure.
It's good. And it can be benign. It may be that it's indicative of a problem. If you have CPU pressure, you may see SOS scheduler yield because you're doing all your work, but there's just so much work to do, and there's so many other things that are operating on here, and you're waiting to get back onto the queue. Well, the wait itself isn't necessarily telling you you've got CPU problems. However, what you might see is signal wait times. So if you run the wait stats query, and again, just Google Paul Randall wait stats query, you'll find it. It's the wait stats query. We all just copy and paste that same query.
Exactly. If it ain't broke, don't try to fix it.
Right, exactly. I mean, every once in a while he does update it, like, oh, here's a new wait in SQL Server 2022 that isn't relevant for performance tuning. If you ever see this wait, cool. It doesn't mean anything. Right. Actually, I could probably scroll down here and try to find one of these, but something like extended events timer event. Yes, it is technically a wait. Yes, you may actually see it a lot. Doesn't mean that it's a performance problem. Never worry about that one. So you run this query and it gives you wait time in seconds, resource time in seconds, signal time in seconds. and a few other things. Well, that signal time in seconds, that's what he's talking about with signal weight. If you're seeing enormous signal weight, extremely high signal weights relative to resource weights, then yeah, there may actually be a CPU related problem that adding more CPUs could make your queries finish faster. If you have a really long runnable queue, you've got tens of thousands of, well, let's not go crazy here. You've got constantly like hundreds of items in your queue, and these things are taking a while to finish up. Your queries may take longer than if it was the only thing running, because you finish your 4 milliseconds, all right, and you just keep getting back onto the ride. Well, extending the analogy, this is like Cedar Point adds a whole bunch of new rides, and now instead of everybody queuing up for the 1 or 2 rides, they're going to a bunch of other rides, and now they can ride them more often, and they get sick faster, and then we've finished the analogy faster. So we have more CPUs. That's how you can potentially have a reduction in SOS scheduler yield weights. But having the weight itself doesn't necessarily mean you've got a problem. It just means you're doing a lot of work. Sometimes it could just be, hey, if you write faster queries that are more efficient, then you may also see these weights drop because you've got less reliance. You've got fewer things that are taking up that 4 milliseconds of time. You're finishing faster because you're retrieving fewer rows, or you've indexed things more appropriately, or you've rewritten some operators, maybe gotten rid of aggregation that wasn't necessary for the task, those types of things.
Ordering, right, is another one.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't need to order something, then dropping a order by operator will potentially remove a sort operator. Potentially, not always.
No.
But it just depends on whether the engine requires a sort at some point. But it does remove the guaranteed sorting. So, different things that you can do to improve the performance time will have an ancillary effect, which could potentially be better than just adding more hardware.
Yeah.
Add more hardware is the answer we love because that's the easy answer. Like, I don't have to do extra work. Just add more hardware. Sometimes add more hardware is real. Hey, I've got 10,000 concurrent users and I've got 2 CPU cores.
Yeah.
You might get some bang for the buck there.
Right.
The one thing, and I'm pretty sure you mentioned this, and I'm hoping my memory is correct, but you talked about how sometimes it may be that the thing it's waiting for isn't a CPU thing. It might be a disk read or something like that. And so
Absolutely.
I remember this being a misleading one where it may actually be that you have like 8 gigs of RAM on your SQL server. At least a decade ago, that was the situation I dealt with, and maybe people have gotten up to 16 or 32, but still, if you have so little RAM that you're paging to disk all the time, you would still get this weight, but you may be like, oh, it's a CPU issue when it has nothing at all to do with the CPU. So you have to be careful about that.
No, that's right. And that is part of the challenge, right? With some of this, and one thing that I get that I would say that because it is hard. I guess I said this out loud, so correct me. But you can see the weight, but sometimes it is hard to take the weight back to an individual query. Right? You can see the stats of the query and kind of see what it's using, but it won't necessarily tell you all the weights. I mean, you could use like SP who is active, you can kind of get it in the action.
Right.
In terms of like,
oh, go for it, Carlos. You finish and then I'll cut you off.
Yeah, but in terms of getting that weight back to the query, sometimes that can be a little challenging.
So newer versions of SQL Server Management Studio on newer versions of SQL Server do have the ability to collect single query weight stats. You can collect for this particular query what were the weights. Check the properties of the query after the fact, and if it's running on, I want to say it's like 2017 or later. So
There we go.
if it's a new version of SQL Server, is currently supported, everything's in line and kosher. There is a way to see those weight stats. Prior to it, you could rig up your own solution where if you knew the session number, you could set a trace, or not a trace, you could set an extended event that would capture those weight stats. And this is essentially what it's doing without having you to set up all this stuff yourself.
Extended event, right?
Yeah.
No, that's nice, right? I mean, I know again that kind of so some of those changes to Management Studio. So now being able to see the time spent on certain operators in the execution plans, I know that was a real game changer for me, because then, previously we were kind of so tilted to the percentage, right? Like I'm blanking on what that percentage is called.
The cost.
The cost percentage, right? We were that's the number we would kind of lean towards. But now actually getting the actual count, okay, what was the CPU cycles for that task, or the duration rather, that made it so much nicer, because now you're actually using kind of real numbers to then troubleshoot. Because at the end of the day, what do I want my queries to do? I want my queries to go faster. So if I can decrease that duration, then everybody's happy. Everybody's happier. And it may not necessarily be the cost percentage. So.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so let's see. Okay, so Mr. Yes, I can catch conference crud too. Why is it that you're catching conference crud? And it could have to do with anything about some trip across the pond.
Yes, the Welsh are inherently contagious. No, yeah, I was at SQL Bits. I think there was 2,000 some registrants, but I don't know how many of those were virtual or not. But it was pretty packed. So yeah, a lot of people had a wonderful time. I continue to not understand Synapse despite attending another pre-con to try and understand Synapse. But I'm getting closer. I also got to learn a lot of internals for Power BI DAX performance from, the one, the only Alberto Ferrari. So those were both great pre-cons. The Power BI and Synapse one was by the guy in the Cube guys. Patrick had a blue screen and then Windows updates mid pre-con, so I feel his pain. Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, it was great. It's funny. I think what you get from a conference changes a lot over time. And so I maybe did not attend as many sessions as I might have liked, but I don't have a lot of coworkers, right? I get to see these guys once a week, but for the most part, I'm toiling away, in anonymity on my computer, and so it was nice to get to catch up with a bunch of people, and yeah, I don't know, I'm drawing a bit of a blank, but that was great. And then afterwards, went to see Stonehenge. So the rocks were bigger than I expected, which sounds dumb. But I thought they were like 10 or 12 feet tall, but they're like 20 or something like that. So they're huge. But there was a lot of great content, a lot of people. The party, SQL Bits will always have the best party as out of all like data conferences, right?
So what was the costume theme this year? It
was Dungeons and Dragons. And they hired a lot of entertainers. So there was like a flame spinner dancer guy. We were walking up and like, so far, I'm really impressed. He's like, so far, there was a like D&D themed sword fight, like 3-versus-1 sword fight with like this rocking kind of music in the background and all this stuff. There was axe throwing. There was, those giant like sumo wrestling outfits that like pad your body a ton. It was like that, but knights. So like you had these guys with maces and then the giant thing over your head. And so I don't even know if they could see, and you just holding a sword and swinging a giant mace. So it was fun.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, and this is why you had trouble learning Synapse, because you were too many bludgeons to the head.
Right? No, I lost some synapses.
I mean,
yes.
In fairness, all this stuff, that was just at Heathrow. That wasn't even at the event.
Yeah. I hate Heathrow, and I'll tell you why. Because apparently rich people shop there. And so if I just want to buy a bottle of water, it's extremely difficult in Heathrow, right? Because like you're just trying to go through, and there's like Gucci and Rolex and all this stuff, and like the biggest duty-free shop I've ever seen. I'm like, I have a cold. I'm dying. Can I just buy some water? And I find the tiny little like quasi grocery store, whatever. That was I'm mad at Heathrow.
You gotta hang out, make friends with Posh Spice or somebody.
I guess so, yeah.
Maybe Doctor Who comes in. You can.
I did want to go to the Doctor Who museum, but it didn't quite make time. My spouse did get to see, I think, two different castles. And someone informed me they're designed to be hard to get into, so I assume that's an achievement.
To be hard to get into.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. So let's see. So next time.
So one last bit of I don't know if it's going to be. It's not errata because I was right, but discussion. So I mentioned wait stats in Management Studio. Newer versions of SQL Server. Make sure try it with 2017 or later. I don't know if it works on anything before then. Just 2017 or later. Just get on 2017 or later already. Just upgrade already. Anyhow, in an execution plan. So make sure you're running an actual execution plan. Click on the leftmost operator, the select operator, the insert, the update, whatever. The one that people rarely look at, but actually has useful information. Select that thing, view the properties. At the very bottom, if there were any wait stats, there's going to be a little section in the properties that says wait stats, and you can drill in. It's a tree view, and it shows you each one of your waits, how many times it waited, and how many milliseconds it waited for that given query. So I just ran one here that had 3.7 seconds of async network IO and 55 milliseconds of memory allocation EXT. And that's just because I selected 1 million rows from a table because I needed something that would generate waits.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
So easy mode. It's easy to do. You can get your wait stats. You don't have to do anything crazy. And you don't have to try to collect aggregates and compare what has changed since the last time I looked.
So now, is this version 19 of SQL Server Management Studio that you're using?
I am running, don't tell anybody how I live, but I'm running 18.12.1.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So and this is why we like having you on the podcast, because you will read the release notes for us, Kevin, and let us know.
I do sometimes, yes. I actually read the CU2 notes and pointed out the polybase thing.
There you go. See? Yeah, so sometimes keeping up with those, again, right, it was interesting. So Redgate, just SQL Monitor, which we use, just came out. They'd had a version increase because they released so frequently that we were going to install. And then all of a sudden on Tuesday, they released a new major version, right? We went from 12 to 13. And I'm like, oh, gosh. Now I have to go read some release notes. Like, what is the version 13? And anyway, then we decided based on those notes that we were going to wait until 13.1. So anyway, okay, very good. I think that's going to do it for today's episode, compañeros. As always, should you want to reach out to us, or should you want to be on the show, because we know that you want to be, particularly if you were at SQL Bits, right? Come and talk with us. Let us know. Reach out to us, and you can do so, Mr. Eugene.
Yeah, you can find me at SQLgene on Twitter, or shoot me an email, eugene@sqlgene.com.
Mr. Kevin.
I just found out that if you drill down into the optimizer hardware dependent properties property in a select operator, you actually can get my details. Go check it out.
Oh, man. Yeah, the data team, or the tools team, we're going to have to put in a call to Aaron Stiletto. Right? You know, what's she doing? You know? Okay. Compañeros, you can reach me on LinkedIn. I'm at Carlos L. Chacon. Thanks again for listening in. We do appreciate it. And we'll see you on the SQL Trail. Bye now.
Bye.
Data Partners.